Good morning. We're delighted that you're here with us today. Most of you are watching this by means of modern technology. I'm doing it on Wednesday morning, and you'll hear it on Sunday morning. But I'm thankful for the opportunity to do this. Thankful for all of those who tune in to listen to it. We try to keep it to about 33 or 4 minutes in order to give you time to hear this and then still get to the assembly on time. So we're starting today at Acts chapter, let's see, where is it? Acts 21, beginning with verse 17. To set the stage, Paul has been with some companions, has been on his way to Jerusalem. He has gathered up a collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem from the Gentile churches, hoping to use that to heal whatever breach there might be between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians. There is a controversy going on that Paul is sort of at the center of. It is very clear to the Jews, and it has been decided in this Jerusalem Council, that the Gentiles do not have to obey the law of Moses and be circumcised in order to become a Christian. In other words, they didn't have to be a Jew before they could be a Christian. However, the Jews are still encouraged, at least, to keep their traditions, and I would assume they don't make sacrifices anymore because they know that Christ is the ultimate sacrifice. But things like keeping the Sabbath and keeping the dietary laws are things that they continue basically to do. So there's a rumor about that Paul is not only teaching the Gentiles they don't have to be circumcised and obey the law of Moses, but that he's also teaching the Jews that they don't have to continue anymore should not continue anymore in the traditions of the Jews. And Paul has not been teaching that, and that's stirring up a great deal of controversy against him. So James proposes, first of all, let me say, on the way to Jerusalem, he was encouraged, urged by prophets, 7 daughters of Philip and a man by the name of Agabus, not to go to Jerusalem because he'll be bound there and carried places he doesn't want to go, and be persecuted. But Paul was determined to go. He felt like that the Spirit was urging him to go and to present this contribution to help heal this breach and make people feel better about each other. And therefore he went on, acknowledging that what the prophet said would happen might be happen. But he said, I'm willing to be bound, to be persecuted, and even to die for the sake of Christ and for the mission that he has given me to do. So Paul then goes on to Jerusalem and comes to visit James, who is sort of the leader of the Jerusalem church. That's presumably James, the Lord's brother. And he presented the contribution to the Jews that he had brought from the Gentile Christians, and he was, first of all, gladly received by the Christians there in Jerusalem. That would be mostly Jewish Christians, and they accepted what had been done because they had already had the Jerusalem conference. And in that, Paul had talked about the work they had done among the Gentiles and how the Lord had blessed that work with allowing them to do works of miracles and signs to show that God was pleased with what they're doing, but also to give Peter some 5 miracles to prove that he needed to preach the gospel to Gentiles at the household of Cornelius. And then James himself had read from the book of Amos, a passage which prophesied that in the days to come, the tabernacle of David would be opened up to all the nations. And they concluded that the Gentiles did not have to obey the law of Moses, did not have to be circumcised. They simply had to avoid some things that were associated with idolatry. And so Paul went on to accomplish what James wanted him to do. He said to keep people from believing and thinking that you are urging even the Jewish people not to observe the law and not to keep any of our traditions. He said, we have two men who are taking a vow to go through the temple, and probably a temporary Nazarite vow. And he said, you go with them and pay their expenses, and that way people will know that you're not teaching that the Jews did not need to keep the traditions of Moses and the other things that they had been doing. So Paul agreed to that and did pay their expenses and went with them. That's a matter of controversy these days. Some people say even that Paul ought not to have done that it was a sin. However, I think that Paul was simply following what he had said he would do, in that he would become all things to all men, that he might by all means save some. His point was, when he was among the Gentiles, he didn't bother with the Jewish dietary laws. He ate with the Gentiles whatever they ate. But when he was among the Jews, he was very careful to keep the Jewish traditions and eat only what the Jews were allowed to eat that was not considered unclean. And therefore he could be accepted by both sides and be willing to be heard as he preaches the gospel to them. But as we said, it stirred up a controversy because the Jews accused him of doing things and teaching things that he had not taught. And then in addition to that, while he was fulfilling this request of James to go with these Jewish people with a vow and to pay their expenses and go with them, the Jews outside the temple accused him of something else. He had a brother named Trophimus, who was from a Gentile from Ephesus, that had come with him actually to help bring the money from Ephesus to give to the Jewish Christians. And they had seen him in the city, and they decided, maybe even deceptively, that he had carried Trophimus into the temple. And since Trophimus was a Gentile, he was not allowed to go into the temple, and that would defile the holy place, is what they were accusing him of. And he had not done that, but that didn't matter. They were accusing him of it, and stirred up a riot against him, and intended to kill him. There were some 40 men that had made a vow that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. Well, I suspect they're hungry and thirsty by now. They never got around to getting to do that. But nevertheless, they were about to, and Paul sent a nephew to the tribune, the head of all the soldiers in the area, the Roman soldiers, as to what this plot was, and he came to rescue Paul, and he knew Paul was a Roman citizen, and so he took him to a safe place. And then he was going to carry him down to Caesarea to be heard by the governor, Felix. His accusers, the Jews, could come, and he would come, but he would be there under protection of the Roman soldiers, and therefore could not be killed by those who had vowed to put him to death. So Paul appears before Felix, the governor. Felix came in with his wife, Drusilla. There's quite a story about that. She was kin to the Herods. Her granddaddy was the one who had killed John the Baptist. Her daddy was the one who had put Peter, Andrew, James to death early in the time when the apostles were preaching. And she was known for her beauty and for sexual promiscuity. And she had married Felix, the Roman governor, and was sitting with him in this judgment when Paul appeared before him. And Felix then begins to preach. Well, first of all, he was speaking to the people who were gathered against him with a riot, and the Roman tribune had come to rescue him. And Paul asked to speak to the Romans for a moment, and was speaking Greek to them. And they wondered if he wasn't an Egyptian who had raised up an opposition against the Jews and against Caesar, and had created a stir. That's told about in the book in Josephus' history, and related here, referred to by this Roman tribune as something that they knew had occurred. But Paul said, "No, I'm not that Egyptian. I am a Jew. I'm from Tarsus, a good-sized city, no mean city, as the King James puts it, and I'm preaching what he calls the way." 4 or 5 times in this area, in this part of the book of Acts, the Christians, the way of Christ, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," is referred to as the way, with a capital W in our English translations, and they mean by that the Christians. Jesus had told them, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." They called the way, they were following him, although he had now died and gone to heaven. They called that the way. And also, Paul mentioned it of the sect of the Jews following the Nazarene, which of course referred to Jesus. But it's interesting to me that just the way is what the way of Jesus and the Jews and the Christians among the Jews were called. And then he stands up to speak to the people, and he speaks in Hebrew. And they were settling down when they heard that he was speaking in Hebrew, because they recognized he was therefore one of them. And as he spoke in Hebrew, he perceived that in the council there were some Pharisees and some Sadducees. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection or in angels or other such things as that. The Pharisees did believe in the resurrection. Their idea of the resurrection was a little bit thwarted. They thought it was more like a physical resurrection to a physical body with all of its infirmities. But nevertheless, they were adamant that there was to be a resurrection of the dead. So Paul recognizes that and starts out by saying, "It is because of the resurrection of the dead that I'm brought before this council this day. I have been preaching the resurrection." Of course, the way he'd been preaching it is that Christ was raised from the dead. But that started a controversy in the council between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and sort of got Paul off the hook for at least a little while. And then after a time, it settled down, and the Roman tribune actually had to take Paul away. Paul was, 3 or 4 times here in this section of Acts, Paul recounts his conversion. It's told, of course, in Acts 9, just as Luke is writing the history at the time when it occurred, and then he recounts it here to the council, and he recounts it to Felix, and he recounts it to Festus, the Roman governor who followed him, and then he recounts it again to King Agrippa of Herod, who visited and wanted to hear what Paul had to say. So there are about 4 accounts in here of Paul saying how he was converted and why he was doing what he was doing. Nearly everybody, of course, recognized that he had at one time persecuted Christians, and now he was preaching the gospel and trying to convert people to Christ. And so he's explaining why that happened, and the fact that he saw the risen Christ on the road to Damascus as he was going there to persecute Christians and bring them to Jerusalem for trial in that place. So as he introduces himself to the people, he recounts the story of his resurrection. And he ends up by saying, "And that Christ then sent me to the Gentiles." Well, that broke open the assembly. That was just something the Gentiles, the Jewish Christians, did not want to believe. And they were opposed to Paul doing that, and they did not want to believe that he'd been sent by Christ and the Holy Spirit, although he had. And So they created a riot again when Paul said that he had been appointed apostle to the Gentiles. So once again, the tribune had to bring his soldiers down to rescue Paul to keep him from being killed. And in order to prevent that, Paul, as a Roman citizen, exercised his right and said, I appeal to Caesar. But first of all, he would be sent to a Roman governor, Felix, in Caesarea, which was the Roman capital of that area. So he comes to Felix, and Felix has Drusilla with him. There's a lot of interesting history about that, and I'm not going to recount all of it because it's too lurid to present to a mixed audience. Drusilla was part of the notorious Herod family and had been involved in all the things that they were involved in as they sought to kill Christians and kill John the Baptist and kill James. But also she was a notoriously promiscuous woman, although a very beautiful woman. And right now, at least, she was living with Felix, the governor of that area representing the Romans. And then Paul took advantage of that situation not only to present the story of his conversion as to why he was doing what he was doing, but also he preached to them concerning righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. There was nobody needed those subjects more than Felix and Drusilla. And that's what he preached, knowing what they needed. And they heard what he said. They trembled over it. They recognized that it was condemning of them. But Felix gave a very interesting comment, and one that's been often preached about. He said, "Go your way, and when I have a more convenient season, I will hear these things from you." And of course, that more convenient season never came, and he never was at all converted, although he sort of pretended to be putting it off and procrastinating. It's one of the fairly common reaction to the preaching of the gospel. We put it off. I'll talk to you later about this. We'll see what develops, and I'll come back to you. And it's fairly rare that those who do that actually come back. Procrastination is a means of putting things off so that we don't have to confront them, and then deliberately not coming back to them so we still don't have to confront them. But Paul, nevertheless, had confronted Felix and Drusilla with righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. And they recognized they needed those messages, and therefore were convicted by them. But instead of obeying, they procrastinated and put Paul off. But this time, Paul is taken to Felix, the governor, to the governor in Caesarea, and therefore was told that he would hear the case against Paul from the Jews, and that they would come and present their charges against him. And they did. They came and they told Felix that Paul was stirring up the Jewish population, teaching them that they did not have to obey the law of Moses and did not have to be part of the Mosaic covenant in order to receive Jesus and to be saved. And that was something they were very much against, and that was why they were trying to kill Paul. Felix recognized that that wasn't anything that the Roman government had anything to do with, but instead was a matter of simply among the Jews. And therefore, he really had nothing to accuse Paul for that was of subject to Roman law. And he as much as said so. But then it says he put him off. He had heard Paul in his recounting why he was there and why he had done what he had done, refer to bringing alms to the people. And that caused Felix to think he had access to some money, and if he kept him in prison, he might be able to get a substantial bribe from him. That's not said in those words, but that's said exactly in the text. And so he left Felix in prison, and there was a change of governors, and a man by the name of Festus became the governor after Felix was no longer governor. And Paul appeared before Festus and again recounted the same story of his conversion and why he was now preaching the gospel that he had before so earnestly attacked and persecuted. And basically it was because he saw the risen Lord and now believed in the resurrection. There are many proofs for the resurrection of Jesus. And one of the strongest ones is the conversion of Paul. And for that matter, of the growth of the church among the Jews and the Gentiles as the gospel was preached and the resurrection of Jesus was believed in. How in the world does a prominent persecutor suddenly begin to preach the very gospel that he was persecuting? Obviously, he saw something, obviously he believed something, and obviously he was sincere about it because he was willing to go to his death in order to continue to preach it. So the fact that people like Paul were being converted at least suggests a reality of what they were believing and what they said they saw. And therefore, when Paul says he saw the risen Lord, it was believable because he had made such a change in life and was willing to lay his life down for the gospel that he now preached. There was a descendant of the Herods, King Agrippa, who also wanted to hear what Paul had to say. And he came with his wife, who, like Drusilla, was a very promiscuous lady, a woman, but he had said that he wanted to hear what Paul had to say. And Paul addressed him as one whom he said knew the gospel, knew the facts about the way, and knew what had been said before about Jesus and his resurrection and believing on him. And as a result of that, he was familiar with the way, as Paul expressed it, and the things that were happening about that and what was now being preached. So Paul starts out by saying, "Do you believe the prophets?" And then he says, "I know that you believe." And he talked about the prophets and the ones that said what Jesus would do, and specifically in Isaiah, where he talked about the fact that the Messiah would die for our sins, would be a propitiation for us, and would make possible the salvation of many who would believe on Jesus. And Agrippa responded in a strange way, and the different translations deal with it differently. Some of them say something like, "Would you, with just one sermon, try to convince me to be a Christian?" As though that were not practical and not likely to happen. The King James and a couple of other translations say, "With this little persuasion, you almost persuaded me to be a Christian." So was he almost persuaded, or was he putting him off by saying, "You've just touched the hem of the garment and you expect me to be converted because of that"? The two translations are different, and I don't know which one is right, but whichever one it was, it is obvious that Agrippa was stirred by what Paul and others had said. And when he said that, Paul said, "I would wish that everybody here in the sound of my voice were just as I am, except for these bonds." He was tied up and he was in as a prisoner. That's a powerful statement. He's a prisoner. But Paul said, "I wish everybody here believed what I believed and was doing what I'm doing." because he so thoroughly believed in the gospel and the fact of the resurrection of Jesus, because he had seen the risen Lord. And Agrippa and his wife were both also hearing and maybe close to being converted as a result of all that was being said. And then Paul was brought before the council again. And the high priest was named Ananias at that time. And Paul started out by saying, "And I have lived before God in all good conscience to this day." And the high priest commanded him to be hit and smoted, to use an old term. They told him to hit him because he had made that statement. That tells us something about the conscience that we need to remember. Our conscience urges us to do right and bothers us when we do wrong. And God put that conscience in us to do that. But the conscience has to be educated in order to know what is right and what is wrong. Although Paul had been persecuting Christians, he believed that he was doing God's will. And therefore he could say, "I have lived in all good conscience until this day." We need to realize that our conscience is a good guide only to the extent that it has been correctly taught, so that it knows and we know what is right and what is wrong. And then the conscience will urge us to do what we know is right and not to do what we know is wrong. And Paul had that kind of conscience, and it had allowed him to kill Christians because he believed that that was what he ought to do. Jesus had told his disciples, "The time will come when they will kill you in believing that they're doing God's will." And that literally had happened in the days of the Apostle Paul. So with that, Agrippa signs off, and he goes on to some of the other trials that he would have to go through. One fact about the conversion of Paul that is mentioned in Paul's address to Agrippa, Acts 22 and verse 16, is worth noting. Ananias came to Paul, laid his hands upon him, and caused him to receive his sight because he had recognized the truth of what was being said, and because he had been struck blind by the light when the light appeared and the Lord appeared to him. So he had been almost blind, if not blind, since that time. Ananias laid his hands upon him and caused him to be able to see. And then he also said to Paul, "And now what are you waiting for? Get up and go be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord." The Apostle Peter, in his sermon on the day of Pentecost, the first sermon preached after the Great Commission, said that baptism was for the remission of sins. Here, Ananias says it is to wash away your sins. Same idea, basically, same thought, same purpose of baptism. And Paul recognized that that's what he needed to do, and he arose and he was baptized. And he went forth from there preaching the gospel. He was still there in Damascus, of course, when all that occurred, and he preached the gospel throughout Damascus. Instead of persecuting the people who believed it, he persuaded others to believe it and declared it to be true. And as a result of that, the gospel grew in Damascus. But the governor began to turn against him because he was preaching what he believed was not right. And so he set about to kill him. And Paul had some friends who put him in a basket and led him over the wall of Damascus. And he went back to Jerusalem. And there, the Jerusalem church hesitated to accept him because they knew what he'd been doing, and they were afraid that he was just trying to get in with them so he would know who they were so he could persecute them. But Paul was not of that persuasion. He actually believed the gospel that he was preaching. And Barnabas vouched for him. Barnabas was earlier called the son of encouragement. And here he vouches for Paul and says to the Jerusalem church, you can accept him. He is a fully converted person. He saw the risen Lord, and he wants to do right, and he wants the people to do right, and so he's preaching the gospel of the kingdom in order that others may come to that truth and believe and walk in the way, again, it says. So the Jews, therefore, the Jewish Christians, therefore, accepted him into their number. This is the nearest place we have in the Bible to what we call placing membership. We know that people don't join the church. They're added by the Lord to the church when they obey the gospel. And I hope you remember that. That is the biblical definition of the church. God adds to the church those that are being saved. Think about what that means. God does the saving and God does the adding. There's nobody in the church that's not saved. There's nobody saved who's not in the church. Because when they were saved, God added them to the church. There's a book by Brother Leroy Brownlow that's a very helpful book in a lot of ways. It's called Why I'm a Member of the Church of Christ. And it lists some number of ways, I don't know if it's 40 or how many, but a number of ways regarding what the Church of Christ believes. And he's a member of the Church of Christ because it believes this, because it does that. And I suggest to you that for me at least, there's not 42 reasons why I'm a member of the Church of Christ. I'm a member of it for one simple reason. When I obey the gospel, Jesus added me to it. And therefore, as a member of the church, as a member of his body, I am preaching the gospel of the kingdom to encourage others also to respond to the gospel, to be saved, and to be added to the Lord's church. Jesus said to Peter, after he had confessed, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," that you'll be called Peter. And upon this rock, the word Peter is a stone. On this rock is a bedrock, solid bedrock underneath the soil. Upon this rock, the rock of the salvation, the rock of the confession, the rock of the truth that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Paul said that's the foundation that no man can lay other than that one. So upon this rock, upon this truth, that you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus said, I will build my church. That's the church to which God adds the saved as they obey the gospel. That obviously means that the only role of the church that counts is not ours, that we keep, although we need to keep one, keep up with people and help them as they have need. But the only role that really counts is the one that God keeps in heaven. He knows who he has saved. He knows, therefore, who he has added to the church, and he, therefore, is keeping up with them in his book, the book of life, and that's the book he'll look into when Judgment Day comes. All who are written in the Lamb's book of life will be redeemed, saved, and said, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter thou into the joys of our Lord. That's what we all want to look forward to, and we need to have faith in Jesus Christ, faith enough to obey him and to do what he says, so that then we too can be added by the Lord to the church and written in the Lamb's book of life. We'll take up next time at this point and read and study what takes place after that, and we'll see how Paul goes to Jerusalem. Not like he thought he would as a free traveling evangelist, but rather having been bound and captured by the Roman government and carried to Rome. Let me mention one more thing that I have mentioned before. Both Luke and Acts are written to the most excellent Theophilus. We don't know Theophilus other than his name means the lover of God. But the fact that he's called most excellent is an indication that he was a Roman governor or Roman functionary of some kind in a position of power. That's exactly the term that Paul used for the most excellent Felix when he was talking to the governor. And so the most excellent Theophilus indicates a man of some responsibility in Roman government. And Paul and Luke therefore shows in his travels of Paul that the people who are persecuting him are not the Romans, they're the Jews. And over again, it's the Romans who come to rescue him. That's the message, I think, that Luke wanted the judges who were going to be deciding Paul's fate needed to know, because he was not a threat at this point to Caesar. He was simply preaching the gospel of Jesus as he believed it, and having seen the risen Lord, proclaimed the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. We'll take up there next time, and thank you very much for being with us, and appreciate your encouragement as it comes to me, first by the fact that you're here and listening, and second by the kind words you've said from time to time about the lesson. Blessings to you in Jesus' name.